Good evening, and I hope you had a safe and happy Memorial Day
Desperate
weekend.
attempt to find something good to come out of this, Maya. Is it a good thing that
we don't know
As you heard Ashley say, for the next 21 days, we're going to spend our time praying together, asking God to show up before we ever regather. And I just want to get this off my chest. Don't judge me. Of all of the spiritual disciplines, like Bible reading, giving, tithe, serving, my least natural and most difficult spiritual discipline is prayer. And so this is going to be a stretch for me. And I know I'm not alone. Some of you, your least natural spiritual discipline is prayer as well. And I've actually figured out why I struggle with prayer. It's because I feel like when I'm sitting down praying, I should be up doing something. And that just makes sense to me. Why are we just sitting around talking about it? No, look, I know some of you are going, but haven't you read the Bible? Yeah, I have. I know better than that. I know that our prayer life is kind of like, think of it as some soldiers who go behind enemy lines and they get pinned down. What's the first thing they do? They call for air support. If you don't call for air support, it doesn't matter how good a shot you are. It doesn't matter how well you maneuver. It doesn't matter how carefully you care for those who have been injured. If you don't call for air support, you're in trouble. And right now, we are in trouble as we think about regathering without the help of our God. So we're just for 21 days, we're calling on people to pray together on your campus that God would show up before we ever do. And I've thought about this. Actually, I've learned this lesson about prayer. Sometimes we don't pray because we don't think we need to. It was years ago. My wife is out in the back of our yard. At that time we lived in Missouri, so we had a big acre lot, huge trees, full grown, and they would shed limbs all the time. So every once in a while you need to go pick up the limbs, break them down, and you throw them in a fire pit and have a big bonfire. In Missouri, that's called a date. So she was out in the back getting all the limbs together. I was in the garage working. She had this one big old limb that was too big to break with her hands. So she set it on one of the big rocks around our fire pit, and she thought, I'll just jump on it. She jumps on the limb. The limb disagreed and then became disagreeable by catapulting my wife across the fire pit. She landed on her arm and gashed her arm wide open. Our daughter at the time, little girl, so I don't blame her, but she seriously could have improved her communication skills some. She just comes racing into me, and all she says is, "Mom is bleeding." And I thought, great, I'm a widower by now. So I as fast as my feet could carry me, I run out to my wife, and faster yet, my heart ran to the Father, and I pleaded for the life of my wife. Now, it turns out she was okay, but I learned something in that moment, that I am good at prayer. I just don't always feel the need to pray. Now, don't judge me. I bet right now you can't even say the whole Lord's Prayer honestly. Our Father who art in heaven, okay, I got that. But what about when you get to the line that says, "Give us today our daily bread"? Now, some of you can really pray that authentically because you're hurting right now. But for most of us, the fridge is full, the pantry is packed. You could survive for a month just on what you could scavenge in your house right now. So how do we really pray for daily bread? Or how do you pray for the security, like, God, protect my home? God, I got this one. I've got homeowner's insurance, bundled with auto, thank you, flow. We have so insulated our lives with 401ks and medical plans that sometimes we don't feel the pinch of the need to pray. And I can hear you through the screen right now saying, but what about our spiritual needs? No, I get it. Like, seriously, I get it. I know how desperately we need prayer for our spiritual lives, but sometimes the spiritual is less visible than the physical. So my struggle is being aware of the need to pray until something happens like COVID, and suddenly you realize, I can't come up with a cure. I can't create jobs. I can't take care of those I care about the most. And so then we turn to God in prayer. And God is waiting for us right now as a church to seek his face because he wants to show up before we ever do. So for the next 3 weeks, we're gonna pray on every campus. So your campus is open right now for prayer. Before we gather the crowds, you can go. And not just once. I would encourage you to go. Some of you, you could make it a daily routine to go and pray at a certain time. For some, at least once a week. At least once a week, go to your campus to pray. And Ashley and I, in the next 4 weeks, want to coach you on how to pray. Now, don't be surprised about that. If you don't know how to pray, we're not casting shadows at you. Did you know that the disciples only asked Jesus ever to teach them one thing? It was how to pray. It's not a natural skill. So we want to coach you up a little bit by looking at 4 prayers of Paul and giving you some ideas of when you come this week to pray at your campus, what to pray for. We begin with this powerful prayer of Paul in Ephesians chapter 3. I'm going to begin reading in verse 16. Here's the prayer. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your innermost being. Now, I want to focus in on the word power. Power. It's fun to say. Power. That word, like power, no matter what you combine it with, I like it. For example, power tools. I've never met a power tool that I didn't need. Superpower. I've never heard of a superpower that I didn't want. Power play, it's the best part of the game. Power aid, delicious. Power supply, don't leave home without it. And horsepower, can you really ever have too much? Seriously. I love power. But the interesting thing about power in the Bible, I'm gonna actually say the Greek word for you. And not because I want you to know Greek, but I want you to hear the English word that comes from this Greek word. So I'm gonna say the Greek word. Whatever group you're in right now, if you're watching with someone else, say out loud what English word you hear in this Greek word. You ready? Here's the Greek word, dunamis. Did you hear the word dynamite in this Greek word for power? And that's because the guy who invented dynamite actually got to name it, and he used this Greek word to name it. He was a pacifist, but he invented this material that was super explosive, and he knew that it would be used for munitions. This is the late 1800s, and he thought, we are going to bring an end to war by having a power that is so powerful that it will stop the enemies from all attacking. Obviously, it didn't work. Through his lifetime, his invention created more opportunity for death and destruction than any single invention in the history of the world. In 1888, his brother died. And there was one newspaper in France that mistakenly thought it was the inventor that died. It was his brother, but they thought the inventor of dynamite has died. And they wrote his obituary. And they identified him as the merchant of death who got rich by creating new ways of mutilating and killing human beings. So this inventor is reading the newspaper, he gets this French paper and he goes, wow, I mean, how many people get to read their own obituary, right? And he's reading this and he's saying, that is not what I want my life to be all about. So 7 years later, when he actually did die, they discovered his will. He left the majority of his vast fortune to establish an annual award for the persons that year who did the most to contribute to world peace. You probably guessed by now that the inventor of dynamite is Albert Nobel. And the Nobel Peace Prize, in my estimation, is his attempt to rewrite his own obituary. And so, having said all that, I want to read for you what this power in the New Testament is really all about. So, this word for power in the New Testament is surprising. The reason I tell you Albert's story is because we think of power often as destructive. Whether it's military power or corporate power or political power, often it is used to harm people. But in the New Testament, it is the opposite. God's power is used only to help people. In fact, the first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, tell the story of Jesus. Every use of dunamis in the Gospels is about Jesus' miracles. The power of God was used by Jesus to give sight to blind eyes, to straighten withered limbs, to give people's legs the ability to walk again. He only used power for the powerless to help and recreate life in them and dignity in them. Now, here's where it gets really surprising. If you start moving through the New Testament with this word dunamis, the power that gave Jesus the ability to do miracles, God's power is now in us. That's a surprise. We come to Acts chapter 1. Surprise number 1 is that God's power is in us. When you turn to the book of Acts, this is the day of Pentecost, so it was appropriate to read a passage leading up to Pentecost. Acts chapter 1, verse 8 says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth." Right now, church, God's power, the power that brings life to people, that power is in you to give life to your community. But that's surprise number 1. Surprise number 2 with power is that God's power is perfected in our weakness. Normally, when you think about praying for power, God, I want power. Why? To get another job, to overcome an addiction, to conquer my enemy. God's power is actually at its best when you are at your weakest. Don't take it from me. This is actually God himself speaking to the Apostle Paul. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Why? Some of you know right now, like you're in it with the loss of a job, or maybe you have COVID, or maybe something is just overwhelming you and you feel so weak right now. It's in your weakness that God's power intervenes, and everybody watching says, I know you didn't do that. That was God in you. See, when we're powerful, we get glorified. When we're weak, God gets glorified. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and read the rest of the prayer from Ephesians chapter 3. I'm going to begin in verse 17. "So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all of the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide, how long, how high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know that this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God." Verse 20, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us." That's the prayer. It has 2 points. The first point of this prayer is that we are to pray for power. And this is actually surprising to me, that we would pray for power to grasp how much we are loved. You can't even, it's beyond your ability to comprehend how much God loves you. You need his divine power to even understand the depth, the breadth, the height of God's love. I learned that lesson partially. It was nearly 35 years ago. My son was born, and I'd never been a baby guy. In fact, it's kind of embarrassing. My son was the second baby I had ever held. And I remember vividly the first time my wife left me alone with him. And I was like, his little life was in my hands, just he and me. And I laid him on the bed, and it was an evening, and the curtains were drawn just a little bit, and the moon was shining on his perfect little face. He was a newborn. And I was overwhelmed with love for him. And I said out loud, "I love you." I knew he couldn't understand a word I said, but I wasn't saying it because he could understand it. I was saying it because I needed to express it. I love you. And once wasn't enough, so I said it again. I love you. And again, I love you. And I bet it was 10 or 15 minutes over and over. I was overwhelmed by love for this little creature. And to be honest with you, I had no reason to love the kid. Like, he didn't just do nothing for me. He emptied my bank account and filled his pants in my house. And of course, that filled with an odor that was surely from the pits of hell. I mean, here's this little baby that had done nothing for me. And I'm just telling you, if you come over to my house and you fill your pants, you're not coming over again. Sorry, but there's no reason to love that, except that it wasn't about him. It was about me. And my prayer for you in this moment, wherever you're watching, maybe you're on your cell phone watching somewhere, maybe you're just listening to iPods driving down the road, or maybe you're in a living room with your family or with a watch party. I pray the Holy Spirit grabs you by the lapels right now and just pulls you in close and says, don't you understand? I love you, I love you, I love it. His love for you is overwhelming. And God keeps saying it, and he knows you're not gonna fully comprehend it. That's why we need to pray for power to comprehend the love of God. And some of you will react and go, but I kind of messed my pants back there. And God's going, I know, and I can clean it up. You may think, well, I've emptied your bank account of grace. Listen, you haven't touched his bank account. His grace is so rich, so wide, so deep. You haven't come close. I wish you could know the depths of God's love for you. Because if you understand the depths of God's love, then you could begin to live the life that God has for you. Now, I was reminded this last week. I had a buddy of mine come over to the wood shop. His name is Tappin. I just call him Tapp. And he's got a 12-year-old son. So we're going to help coach his son on a woodworking project, a charcuterie board. So it's so cool. I mean, it's 12-year-olds working on a bandsaw. You know how I feel about power tools. He did a great job. And then we go to the planer. There's a loud noise and wood chips flying everywhere. It's like, it's a man-making moment. We go to the disc sander and he trims up the sides. And then you get to the top and bottom and you just have to sand it. There's no other way. No woodworker loves sanding. And on this particular project, sanding was like 2/3 of the whole project. So he's gotten to play with power tools and now he just has to sand and sand and sand and sand. We used a 60 grit to get all of the imperfections out. We worked on it for a long time. And for a 12-year-old, that's a long time to sand. But after 60 grit, I go, now that we've got it clean, we need to get it smooth. So we go from 60 grit up to 120 grit. And he did a good job, sanded all of it out. And when he was done, I said, a lot of guys would stop at 120 grit. But you're not most men. You are a Tappin. And as long as there's more grit, you keep going. And you can see him like this chest puffed out a little bit. He goes, yeah, I'm a Tappin. And so he sanded from 120 up to 240. And I'm telling you, it was smooth at that point. But I had more grit. And I said, most guys would stop at 240, but you're not most guys, you're a Tappin. So you want to keep going? And it wasn't quite as energetic as, yeah, I'll keep going, because, his dad's standing there, he's kind of got to. So we go to 360. And after 360, he goes, yeah, that's good. And he looked over at his dad, and there was this moment where his dad caught his son's eye. And without a word, he just said, son, I love you. But if there's more grit, you keep going. So he did the 360, and after 360, I pulled out 500. He's just going, but looked at dad, and dad's going, if there's more grit, you keep going. So he sands at 500. Then I pulled out 800. And now we're just getting ridiculous. And you begin to see grains at 800 that you don't see at a lower grit. But he sanded it smooth, and then he's like, okay, surely that's enough. Oh no, I've got 1,000 grit. I mean, you're just polishing at that point. And then for sure we're done. Oh no, I've got 1,500 grit. And he's just like, so he's tired of sanding. But his dad is there. And because his dad loves him, he keeps going. Because if you have more grit, you keep going. So he sanded at 1,500. And at that point, something happened. He's looking down at it and he actually says, that's like glass. Well, he was looking straight down on it. I'm standing off to the side. I actually see the reflection of the light. And at 1,500, it is reflective like glass. I said, come over here and look at this. And there was just this moment of realization. So that's why we go the extra grit to get there's no other way to get that kind of reflection of light. There's a parable in that for your life. Your Father is saying to you, if you understood how much I loved you, you would find the grit to go one more level. Because if you can go one more level, you can get one more polish, the light from me will shine brighter through you. So when you come to your campus this week to pray, I don't know if you're gonna come maybe on your way to work in the morning or maybe on the way home from work. Maybe you got a lunch hour you could pop in. If you have a night shift, I'm telling you, we're gonna be open, every campus is open. In the middle of the night, you come and pray. And the first prayer is to pray that you have the power to grasp how much you're loved. Prayer number 2 is that you would have the power to live a life that preaches without words. I have been stunned through this stay at home, shelter in place. I know there's been some negative things happen. For instance, the day that shelter in place went into effect, pornography sites jumped in use by 10%. Online orders of alcohol jumped by over 250%, while the liquor stores, which are an essential service apparently, grew pickup orders by 55%. Now, look, I'm not judging anyone. All I'm saying is, if liquor stores can stay open as essential service, the church can too, because we broker in a different kind of spirit, but still, it's more important. And I'm just saying, come Father's Day, our plan is to regather. Anyway, I've seen a lot of negativity. And maybe you've seen on the TV these ads for domestic violence. We'd give you the impression that domestic violence is actually up. It's not. It's gone down by 10%. Crime overall has gone down by over 40%. There's something about the sanctity of being at home. And I know for some couples who are already having trouble, being at home together may have added to that, but my experience, the friends that I've talked to, it's actually improved their marriage. Because the sacredness of home, the time you spend communicating with one another, and I've noticed in the communities, the good that is being done in Jesus' name. Now, I can't say that all good is by Christians. It's not. There's non-Christians doing good things too. And not all of them are CCV people. There's other great churches out there doing great things. But I will tell you, in my neighborhood, as I've watched families take care of their community, I am so proud of our CCV people. And I want to tell you just one story about Mike and Kelly. Mike has a gift. I think it's a spiritual gift, but he is a grill master. His barbecue is like Arizona barbecue he's famous. He told me, it's back in the 1980s when he was tailgating at ASU. He got so good that all the other frat brothers, people are, like we want to come to yours. And so he started taking donations and building bigger and bigger. He started to get corporate sponsors. And when his tailgate got to over 1,000 ASU students, the administration shut it down, said you can't do that. But he thought, I might have a business here. Turns out he did. He has been catering barbecue in Arizona for years. But he decided, he and his wife decided, this is the year that we should open a brick and mortar shop. Not just mobile, not just catering, but we'll allow people to pick up the meals for catering from our store. So he opened his brick and mortar barbecue store in January. Terrible timing. And his employees were saying, are we gonna have a job? And he goes, I don't know, I'm gonna do everything I can. They had to actually change their business model from catering large events to providing meals for families. And when he did that, he got some pretty regular customers. One of them, another CCV guy, goes, Mike, I love your barbecue. But I'll tell you what, I've got some families. I'm gonna buy 5 meals for families that need them. And then I'm gonna ask you to donate 5 meals. And Mike's like, of course, yeah, done. So they delivered 10 meals to the community on their own dime. The Glendale Fire Department heard about that, and the fire department loves his barbecue. So the chief went to the firemen in his squad, and he goes, "Hey, boys, I'm gonna match $250. If you guys come up with $250, I'll come up with $250. The very first fireman said, "All right, here's $250. And the chief gave $250, and the other guys donated. They got more than $1,000, and for the last 8 weeks, they have provided meals for more than 100 people in the area. They had no way of knowing that one of those meals, I don't know what the 100 stories are, but I know one story. A meal was given to a family, young family, where the mother had just been diagnosed with cancer. And the meal may not seem like a big deal, but when you get such terrible news like cancer and someone shows you a kindness, even in the simplest form, it means way more than a single meal ever could. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again. And I just want you as a church, we only have 3 more weeks before we regather. I want you to press fast forward on your compassion to the community, because when we regather, we're hitting all cylinders. And we're going to engage our community like never before. We need God. It's not as simple as flipping on the lights and opening the doors. I mean, there will be new challenges for us as a church of cleaning according to CDC guidelines and putting the chairs in the auditoriums at social distancing and caring for our staff and training our volunteers. We're gonna have to re-engage a lot of new volunteers. And if you've been sitting on the sideline and thinking, no, I'm coming back and I wanna volunteer, maybe now is the time for you to step up and volunteer in a brand new way. We are actually not just regathering. In many ways, we are rebuilding. And listen, our greatest challenge is not rebuilding. Our greatest challenge is remembering. Because if we can remember how deeply loved we are by God, then we can begin to love our neighbors in new ways. And isn't that the greatest commandment? To love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. And when you experience the love of God, you have new awareness of how to love your neighbor. So I'm just calling on you, if you're watching right now, wherever you are, iPhone, smartphone, iPad, TV, if you're in a watch party, if you're all alone, if you are hearing my voice, you are commissioned, you are challenged. This is the takeaway, to come to your campus at CCV this week and pray. Pray that God would give you the power to understand how deeply loved you are, so you would have the creativity to love your neighbors in new ways. And if we can do that, we will regather with a vengeance, with the dunamis power of God. So before I let you go, I just want to pray a prayer over you, a prayer that would really share our heart for you. And I'm borrowing this from 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 2 and 3. This is our prayer for you. We always thank God for you and continually mention you in our prayers. That's really true. We remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith. Your work is incredible all over the city. Your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. We do thank God for you. Your campus is open right now for your prayers, that God would show up before we regather. Let's go out and make Jesus famous.